there. Hi. So it's day 37, but who's counting? Me. I'm counting. Amazon posters of Rita Hayworth earlier today. Good evening. I'm Dan Haggerty. Welcome to The Story. We got a well-rounded ball of news to bounce your way tonight. We want to know what you think, so take out your phone while you watch. Talk to us during the show. Send us an email. Find me on Instagram or Facebook. Use Twitter and the hashtag HeyDan. Now, I'm sure by now at this point you've heard that the U.S. just passed the 1 million mark for confirmed coronavirus cases. It's a very, very good headline-grabbing number, but look, for my money, it's not much more useful than that. Outside of explaining that a lot of people are getting sick, but we already knew that, didn't we? Testing in the U.S. remains pretty scarce. Of our 330 million people, we've tested about 5.5 million of them. And remember, most of the people who have been tested up to this point have been the sickest of the sick. But that has started to change. Only recently, though, there's been an uptick in testing, and we've learned a lot more about this virus, who has it, and who had it. Last week in New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo talked about a study where they tested 7,500 random people for coronavirus antibodies. Now, if doctors find those antibodies in someone, it suggests that they've already had the virus and recovered. And some of these people didn't even know that they were sick. Now, of the people that they tested in New York City alone, 21% had those antibodies. Now, we're going to do a little math for you now. New York City's population is about 8.4 million. If 21% of New Yorkers had those antibodies, that means 1.7 million people were in contact with the virus just in New York City. So this is kind of a roundabout way of saying that those 1 million confirmed cases nationwide, that headline, those are just the cases that we know about. Not to sound like a broken record here, but that's why we push so much for people to wear masks when they're out in public, because unless you're really, really sick, you're probably not going to get a test anytime soon. So let's continue to always keep these numbers in perspective. All right, I think I'm about to hopefully make somebody really happy right now, because yesterday, Yvette Burling tweeted, "Hey Dan, I appreciate all the virus news and Q&A, but I am so ready for more." Yvette wants some variety. Now, I can't promise we're going to stop talking about the coronavirus. It's sort of a big deal, but we do have a lot of non-coronavirus news today, starting with our big story. Now, this one started with an obituary that we read last week, and I want to show it to you because you'll probably understand why it grabbed our attention. It was in the Portland Mercury with the headline, "Granny Loved Weed." See, catchy headlines do work. Now, the family did that on purpose, both because Ann Parker had a great sense of humor and because they wanted people to read her story. Now, to be very clear here, this is not a story about somebody who died of COVID-19. But while this whole pandemic was going on, this woman went to great lengths to end her life on her terms. That was a month ago. But her family wants you to know her message now. So they talked to Maggie Vespa.
Obituaries are often a family effort.
I mean, we all experienced Grandma in a slightly different way.
A consensus on how loved ones want the world to see the person they lost for the last time.
I think it was kind of a good representation of Anne and her kind of, I don't know, she had a quirky sense of humor.
This one was no exception.
And contrary to the picture, she's not a deadhead hippie. She didn't even start smoking pot until she was much older, and it really loosened her up and made her go enjoy her life a little bit more.
That said, the woman dubbed the granny who loved weed
Wasn't your average grandma, I guess you could say.
Was Ann Parker, a Portland native and Portland State University alumna who dedicated her life to helping. Her career in social work made sure of that. In retirement, Parker enjoyed traveling here to Costa Rica and spending time with her family. 3 of her grown grandkids, the Bosick siblings, would love to talk about her life, but they promised to amplify Parker's message about death.
There is no death with dignity for Alzheimer's in Oregon.
The term death with dignity carries a lot of weight in Oregon. Back in 1994, the state became the first in the country to legalize physician-assisted death. To qualify, the patient must be at least 18 years old, a resident of Oregon, be able to make and communicate their decisions, and according to a doctor, have 6 months or less left to live due to a diagnosed illness or disease. About a year and a half ago, Parker told her family she planned to employ the law. She'd been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease.
She was a firm believer in people being able to choose, a dignified end for themselves. long before she ever saw something like this coming.
But the family soon learned Oregon's Death with Dignity Act doesn't cover progressive cognitive illnesses like Alzheimer's, because once a person has 6 months or less left to live, their brains have often been so ravaged by the disease they can't make their own decisions.
I was personally, at least, kind of surprised that there wasn't anything that anybody could do in Oregon in that sort of situation. You know, that is a huge set of people that end up stuck.
Parker didn't stay stuck for long. What Oregon's law doesn't allow for, Switzerland's does. Last year, through doctors and nonprofits, she made arrangements to die there in April. Of course, in the meantime, another curveball would come.
She could have waited a little while longer if the COVID pandemic hadn't hit.
By March, the pandemic was upon us, and Parker feared it would make her miss her chance to die on her terms. So, amid tightening travel restrictions, she and her daughter packed up and went early.
The whole process was a nightmare. So many canceled flights and so many last-second perfect luck occurrences had to line up to make it all work.
It did work. The women got to Switzerland and waited more than a week for an earlier appointment. This is a photo of Parker on the morning of March 27th. Hours later, she died peacefully, drinking champagne in a Swiss doctor's office. Ann Parker was 70 years old. The Bossack's mom made it home safe and has been in quarantine since. Now, the family is keeping a promise made to Parker to call for changes to Oregon's Death with Dignity Act, allowing for someone in her shoes to die with dignity at home.
To be able to do this gently and with love, and to be able to be surrounded by family, I would have loved to have been there. I know Anne would feel the same way. I don't think she'd want anybody to go through the same thing.
Okay, Maggie Vespa joining us now. So we get to learn a lot about this family's experience, but a lot of families have gone through this over the years, and it's a battle that's waged on for a long time in Salem.
Yeah, lawmakers have talked about this before multiple times from what we could find. In case in point, I want to show you a bill that was introduced in the last legislative session during summer of 2019, I should say. It was House Bill 2232, and lawmakers through it tried to loosen that criteria that requires a person have 6 months or less left to live, instead requiring that they have a disease that will produce or substantially contribute to a patient's death. And that bill died in committee. Pushback in that case and in past cases largely coming from conservative lawmakers and actually anti-abortion, pro-life groups who say that issues like this, changes like this, kind of, they worry could be a slippery slope, and they say sort of dissolves the dignity of human life, erodes that dignity. So that's kind of their argument in these cases.
Got it. Now, before we started recording this, you told me that there was one more thing this family wanted to tell everyone or share with everyone. What did they want to say?
Yeah, as you know, like at the end of interviews, we usually say, hey, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you really want to touch on? And in this case, Ann Parker's granddaughter, said there is one more thing that we kind of want people to know, regardless of their views on death with dignity, and especially amid the pandemic. So here's what she had to say.
I really strongly encourage people to have the conversation with their family members about what their wishes are. I can't tell you how much easier it is being able to have an open conversation with your loved ones about what they want and what needs to be done and how things are going to go, instead of having to scramble at the last second.
All right, so that was her take, and we thought that message was really poignant. Dan, we have so much more on this story at kgw.com.
Maggie Vespa, thank you. Oregon's Death with Dignity law has been around for more than a quarter of a century. So how did we get here? In the 1980s and 90s, Oregon State Senator Frank Roberts introduced a number of physician-assisted dying bills. He was suffering from prostate cancer at the time and eventually died from it in 1993, while his wife, Barbara Roberts, was governor of Oregon. That same year, a group of lawyers and healthcare workers created the Oregon Right to Die Political Action Committee. They wrote the Death with Dignity Act and got it on the ballot in 1994, and voters passed it by a slim margin. But the group National Right to Life challenged it in court, and a judge put a hold on the law from actually taking effect. A few years later, in 1997, Oregon lawmakers put another measure on the ballot, this time trying to repeal the act. But voters rejected it, and the law finally went into effect, this time with even more support from the public. In the mid-2000s, it was challenged again, this time by the Bush administration, but the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the law. Then in 2008, Washington became the second state in the country to pass a Death with Dignity Act, and other states have followed since. Recently, Oregon lawmakers have even tried to expand the bill, like changing the requirement that patients have 6 months or less to live, but those proposals have failed. Last year, Governor Kate Brown signed off on getting rid of a 15-day waiting period for medication for patients who have less than 2 weeks to live. Since Oregon's law took effect, more than 1,500 patients have been prescribed medication to end their lives. And that's how we got here. Okay. Let's talk about reopening the state for a second, shall we? I want to give you a quick update on the governor's plan. She will likely start the process in rural Oregon first, as we've been reporting. Now, I talked to Pat Doris earlier today about what rural counties are doing to meet Kate Brown's criteria. We heard a while back from the governor's office that she would be opening things maybe county by county, rural area by area, depending on when they meet this criteria. Does that still stand true now?
Yes, I think it's on course, and in fact, it's starting to move along. Yesterday, Baker County submitted this whole comprehensive plan of how they were going to meet the objectives that she had. I know her office was talking to folks out in Baker County all day yesterday, so they are taking a really sharp look at what's being submitted and trying to decide when folks can open up.
What are some of the things that these communities are doing what does the plan entail for some of these people?
Well, it starts with the public health officer. And what the governor has said is that she wants to know that there's going to be a lot of testing available. So testing capacity, that's thing one. And then number two, is there enough protective gear for the hospital workers? Is there a place where you can isolate folks if they become sick? The governor is saying, it's not cool just to have like one person in a 6-person household, to have one person in a room, that there should be a separate spot for that. So in some of these rural areas, it's kind of a challenge to identify a motel or a building where you could kind of put people, but that is what they're working on.
Got it. All right, Pat Doris with the latest. Thank you.
You bet.
Attention, new season shoppers. Starting tomorrow, you won't be allowed to shop there unless you take one specific coronavirus precaution. And as if we didn't already have enough on our minds, now we have to worry about aliens. Seriously, is the universe mad at us or something? And hey, you guys! The Goonies reunite.
Guys! The cast of the Goonies!
Kinda. When the story continues. All right, welcome back. Thank you so much for spending time with us tonight. And thanks especially to everyone writing in using the hashtag #HeyDan or emailing us, Facebook messaging us, all that kind of good stuff. I want to talk about a tweet I got from Jerry Connor, who asked, "Hey Dan, why do stores not require all people to have their faces masked when they come in? It's crazy to me, since we know the masks only protect others and not themselves, that all customers and store workers are potentially at risk from people who shop without wearing masks." And that's a pretty good point, Jerry. Jerry's spot on, especially with that second part there. Unless you have one of those medically approved N95 masks, the mask or covering that you're using, you're doing more to prevent yourself from infecting other people than preventing you from being infected. As for the first part about stores requiring them, all I can say is they're starting to. Starting tomorrow, in fact, you won't be able to shop at New Seasons unless you are wearing a mask. As far as we could find, they're the only store right now requiring customers to wear them. Fred Meyer and Kroger stores started requiring employees to wear them, and Whole Foods hands out masks and gloves to their workers every day. So we've talked here on the story about concerns that coronavirus could spread in jails and prisons. Some states like Washington have let some inmates out, but here in Oregon, we haven't let anybody out. But there is one inmate in particular who wants out, and you'll probably remember her story. Romance novelist Nancy Crampton Brophy is accused of killing her chef husband at the Oregon Culinary Institute back in 2018. It took a few months for police to arrest her. Her lawyers say that she's at high risk for catching coronavirus because of her age and health history. Today, she actually appeared in court in person, face mask and all, which is pretty unusual right now. Anyway, prosecutors used the bail release hearing to present some new evidence, and they talked motive. They say she would have gotten $1.5 million between life insurance and workers' comp for her husband's death. We also heard part of an interview that she did with police the day after her husband was killed.
Even if you find who shot him, it's not going to bring him back. And I want him back. That's the part I want. I don't care about who shot him. I just want him back. I don't want him dead.
See her there in court with the mask on. Tomorrow, her lawyers will argue their case for moving her from jail to house arrest during the pandemic. We'll, of course, keep you posted. Remember at the top of the show, I read a tweet from a woman who's getting a little coronavirus fatigue, like it's the only thing we're talking about. And honestly, I get it, all right? I feel you. And one of the reasons that I get it and I feel you is because of these 3 videos that have been making the rounds. And they have my imagination running wild, and I don't think they're getting the attention they deserve. The D.O.D. released them this week. One is from 2004. The other 2 are from 2015. And they are videos of UFOs. Seriously, I mean, to be as accurate as possible here, the Pentagon calls them aerial phenomena that remain unidentified. These videos, they might look familiar. They've been going around for years, but the Defense Department finally came out and said, yeah, they're real. And if you're thinking, okay, Dan, take off your tinfoil hat. The Pentagon only released these to quiet rumors that they were hiding something. If this was that serious, someone in power would have mentioned something about it. Well, if you're not going to listen to me, listen to former Senator Harry Reid. He said it only scratches the surface of research and materials available. The U.S. needs to take a serious scientific look at this and any potential national security implications. The American people deserve to be informed. I think he meant to say global security. And that is a former majority leader who was in power for every president since Reagan. And again, I empathize with the woman who feels like coronavirus is hogging the spotlight. After all, this grainy image of either Bigfoot or a casual Cascade gorilla has become iconic folklore that's still celebrated and studied to this day. Meanwhile, government-confirmed video of UFOs captured by some of man's most advanced tech from fighter jets doesn't even get mentioned until after the first commercial break. Yet, here we are, on our pale blue dot, focused on a small, spiky virus. That said, if you're one of the 112 people who move to Oregon every day, or at least that was the number of people who moved here before a pandemic, you might not know the Northwest's weird history when it comes to UFOs. Not only do we have the UFO Festival, we are regularly ranked high in UFO sightings. The website 24/7 Wall Street found more than 3,000 sightings in Oregon between 2001 and 2015. In fact, arguably, this picture, the most famous picture of a UFO, was taken in Mount Rainier, Washington in 1947. In the 50s, KGW aired a weekly show called Space Report. How awesome does that sound? And of course, we dug around in the KGW Vault for this episode in 1959.
Thursday, September 24, 1959. For nearly 2 years now on Space Report, I've been giving you details on that enigma of the age, the unidentified flying object. like the UFO that hung over Redmond, Oregon for at least 2 hours early this September morning.
Now, where did you see this unidentified bright object in the sky? Can you point it out to us?
Yes, it was right off in this direction, right out east of Redmond on the Prineville Highway. It came close to the ground and it stopped. And at that time I pulled over to the side of the road and stopped the car and watched it.
It had moved from where you first saw it?
Yes, it had moved in this direction east towards Prineville over Powell Buttes.
Now, if there's something you would like us to... if there's something you would like us to try and find in the KGW Vault, you know how to find us. Use the hashtag HeyDan. Find me on Facebook or email thestory@kgw.com.
Always fun looking back in the vault and seeing the old film and hearing the old news anchor voices too. Definitely fun. Hey, this is a cool story that we came across today too. You've probably heard about coral bleaching in the oceans and how the coral reefs around the world, from the Great Barrier Reef to the Atlantic, are really in peril because of ocean acidification and climate change. Well, here's some good news for you on the coral front, if you will. Check out this video. This is from the Florida Aquarium, and they actually have seen breeding coral in a lab, in captivity for the first time ever. You are looking at ridge cactus coral, and they're interesting. They actually put off little baby cactus that swim around for a while, then they settle down and they go through a metamorphosis like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, but it's the swimming coral turning into a non-swimming anchored coral. So super interesting. Now, a lot of corals reproduce by having mass synchronized spawning events, but not the ridge cactus coral. They only send out a few eggs that turn into these larvae, and then they settle down and grow into cactus. But the researchers at the Florida Aquarium are super excited about this because it's the first time we've seen ridge cactus coral reproduce naturally in the lab. It's really pretty remarkable there. So here are a couple of highlights for you on this as well. It's a land-based breeding program to restock coral reefs, hopefully all around the world. They're focused right now, obviously, on the coast of Florida and in the Caribbean, where they have seen the corals decimated because of changes in the ocean, and some of which they don't really understand. But we do know that climate change, a warming ocean, and ocean acidification have had a big impact on coral reefs all around the world. So this is pretty exciting to see a reproduction program in a lab to help restock coral reefs around the world. Coral reefs are amazing. It's like a kaleidoscope of color when you're underwater looking at them. So if there's anything that we can do to bring them back, that's pretty exciting news. And I thought, Dan, that it would be good to bring some good news to us about things that are happening on our planet these days. Back to you.
Yeah, you got it. Without even explaining the full importance of coral reefs, just from the beauty alone, you can tell it's something worth saving. Matt, thank you so much. All right, keep those comments and questions rolling in. Use the hashtag HeyDan. Email works too. We're going to read a couple of them after the break. Stick around. Goonies. Goonies never say die. Even 35 years later, the cast of the Goonies got together. They got together the same way we're all getting together these days, with a video chat, only theirs was hosted by Josh Gad.
I'd love each of you to quickly fill us in on what you've been up to in and out of quarantine.
We've been doing nothing. What do you mean, what have we been doing? Things have been good, though, man. It's a great time to kind of reassess. What starts to surface is what's important and what's not so important. And it's instigating a lot of things like this, man, which is amazing. This would never happen. And I'm so happy to see everybody. I can't even tell you.
Thanos with the multi-camera shoot there. Hey, of course, if you're new around here, you might not know that the Goonies was filmed in Astoria. And until recently, you could actually visit the Goonies house. When I first moved here, Laura Porter gave me a little tour. It was amazing. Hopefully, someday, they see me waving to all the people. They're like, who's that guy? Maybe one day I'll be able to go back, hopefully, soon. All right, hey, thanks to everybody who wrote in and commented tonight. We got a lot of people a little thankful that we weren't covering only coronavirus stuff. Of course, that's still kind of our focus, as it's the focus of the entire world. One thing I want to talk about tomorrow, that if anybody out there has an experience with this, bottle drop. I want to know about that, about how you are dealing with it. Are you able to find places to drop off your bottles and cans? Are you dealing with long lines? Tell me everything. Reach out. Use the hashtag HeyDan. Until then, we'll see you tomorrow. The news at 6:30 is next.